Help support this network and become a member. Head over to ArchPodNet.com/members for details. It's just $7.99 USD per month, or save on an annual membership. That's ArchPodNet.com/members to support education and outreach.
You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
This is the CRM Archaeology Podcast. It's the show where we pull back the veil of cultural resources management archaeology and discuss the issues that everyone is concerned about. Welcome to the podcast. Hello and welcome to the CRM Archaeology Podcast, episode 242 for June 29th, 2022. I'm your host, Chris Webster. On today's show, Andrew and Doug talk about setting goals in your career and figuring out how you want it all to end. So it's time to go monocle shopping with Andrew, and the CRM Archaeology Podcast starts right now.
Hello and welcome everyone to the CRM Archaeological Podcast, episode 242. And I am Andrew Kinkella, your host, sitting in for Chris today. Joining me is Doug.
Hey everyone.
And Doug, where are you from at this point?
Where am I from originally? Or like where am I based right now?
Yeah, where are you based right now?
Just outside of Edinburgh, Scotland.
There you go. And Chris, who may or may not be with us at this moment. Chris, are you here?
So we have technical difficulties with Chris, so he may or may not join us.
Yeah, so there you go. This is answering the question as to why I'm hosting today. Chris is having some technical difficulties. So with that said, I thought I would throw this over to Doug, who is doing our theme of the day. And Doug, what would you like us to talk about?
Yeah, so our theme of today is what's your end goal? And that's sort of like, what are people's golden parachutes or plans for leaving archaeology? And by leaving, that could just also be retiring, not like, going to different careers, but maybe going to different careers. So this episode's talking about career goals, and I suspect they've, for most everyone, they've probably changed and mutated over the years. I don't think I've met anyone who had like a goal that they've managed to pursue throughout their entire career, entire lives. Just, if you start, in your 20s, that's about 40 years of working, and things are bound to change. So this episode's just talking about career goals, and sort of not just current career goals, but like your end goals. So I'm going to throw it over to you, Andrew. Could you tell me a bit about what your current end goal is? How do you plan on leaving archaeology? Is it feet first with the paramedics taking your lifeless body out of your office from the university, or
right? It is. See, there you go. I'm the world's worst interviewee right now. I'm just like, yes, that's it. Next question. No, I really would say that I'm living the dream. And what I mean by that is I have found the spot in archaeology. And we've talked about these kind of things in the past, how when you say, oh, I want to be an archaeologist, there's actually so many shades to that. Okay, what do you mean? Do you want to teach? Do you want to be in CRM? Like there's a lot of sort of mix and match of these different possibilities within archaeology. But for me, I found something that really plays, I think, to my strengths. And yes, I am one of those college professors who just wants to stay in it until the end. I'm like, okay, I don't want to take away from young people. Like, I don't want to be like a full timer for 40 years or something. But I see myself, when the time is right, retiring, but still teaching like 2 or 3 part-time classes, because it's like, it's who I am and it's what I want to do. But I will say, in terms of coming to that, it was a long road. And what I learned from all the stuff I tried and the stuff that worked and the stuff that didn't was to set like reasonable goals for yourself and enjoy the little goals. Like I remember way back, one of my big goals was, man, I just want to be a teaching assistant. Man, that just looks so awesome. I would love to be a teaching assistant. And when I ultimately got that, that was huge for me. So I find that that's something that's kept kind of the fires burning in archaeology is having these little reasonable goals, even now. So I don't stagnate as a college professor. But in terms of being a college professor, I really like it. And I want to kind of stay with the gig. How about yourself?
Yeah, I think it's changed. It's changed over the years. So when I first started out, pretty typical of how most people end up in archaeology. Started a degree, did a field school and enjoyed the field school, and decided, yeah, I'm going to do some CRM. And then started doing CRM. I actually ended up really liking it. I really enjoyed it. When I got started, there were smaller projects, but we ended up doing, I did a lot of what was then Bush's border fence. So pretty remote archaeology, but really interesting stuff.
That's cool. And just for me, what is Bush's and border fence? I've never heard that.
So people forget this because, Trump's loud and whatever, but Trump decided it was going to be a wall. But really, Bush was the first one that decided they were going to do a big border fence to stop immigration, which was a complete joke. Because what they ended up doing is they did pedestrian fencing, which is just like chain link fencing that's so tightly woven together that you can't actually get your fingers in it to climb. But when we were down doing there, we'd survey parts of the fence that already existed, and the fence actually ends. And the wall ends. People don't realize it, but there's well-worn paths that just go around the outside of the physical fences. And actually, when we started doing the physical fence, they'd already decided it wasn't that cost-effective. It costs a small fortune to keep basically fences going up cliffs. I mean, it is rugged. A lot of the Mexico-U.S. border is super rugged. And then also, at one point, someone had taken a welding torch, had cut a door in it, welded on hinges, and blocked it from the Mexican side. So they've mainly moved it to sensors, but sensors don't. That's not a good red meat issue to throw to your base.
Right.
So yeah, this was all about building pedestrian fences where people could walk, and then basically, the Prague hedgehog, those anti-tank little looks like steel beams sort of crisscross.
Oh yeah.
So they put a bunch of those in there as anti-pedestrian, and that was more for the drug runners. So they get tricked out Broncos and basically just huff it over the border in the rugged hills,
right?
And to just outrun the border patrol for smuggling. And so they put in a bunch of those to try to keep the vehicles down and fences, yada yada.
And so those are the things that you see on the beaches of Normandy, right? Those Yeah. And so that was a big project because, it was supposed to be the entire border. And then, it kept shrinking because they suddenly realized that putting a fence through an arroyo. And so when I say arroyo, I know that's a very southwest, but a waterway, basically a dry waterway that then will flood, you're going to lose your entire fence. So they kind of figured that out. But what they did for the project was lots of survey. We surveyed the entire wall, but also the wall that doesn't make the big difference. It's all the support roads. So the archaeology was a year plus project. Sure.
It's because we were surveying all the support roads, which is much longer than the border wall. And so I started out with that. It was great archaeology. It was good people I was working with, but also that started the border wall started 2007, 2008, and then the economy crashed.
Right.
And so made it mostly through 2009. And, it's CRM. It's CRM in the Western states. So that's Secretary of Interior's specifications. Yep. So if you wanted to move up, if you wanted to be, project manager or PI, even sometimes it depends on crew chief, you need to be permitted for the BLM.
Right.
And you need to basically be able to get a master's.
Yeah.
So my career goal was still to do that at one point. I went off to do what was going to be a 1-year master's in the UK, so I could come back and do CRM. And that was over a decade ago. So obviously my career goals have changed quite a bit. My original goals were to do that, just work my way up through CRM, was tech, crew chief, project manager, PI. That was the original goals.
Right.
And hopefully ending out on like a PI somewhere.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think for a lot of us in the CRM world, we do have that foggy goal of like, okay, now I'm in this. I know I like it. I know I want some sort of career in this. And then you kind of look around, you go, oh, I think I need a master's. Okay. But then for me, I found that the path onwards up in the CRM world was kind of foggy. Like I didn't know, the next steps to take. Like I got to the point that I'm sure you did too, where you knew how to get a job. You knew what to do in the job. You know how to survey, you know how to fill out the paperwork and all that kind of stuff. But it's like, how do I get promoted and what are the possibilities of promotion, and what does that entail? Like that part was always kind of like the black arts to me. I couldn't figure it out,
I think a lot of it, and it helped to be where I was. So based outside of Albuquerque, and then, Santa Fe wasn't too far away. A lot of companies are based in that sort of central part of Mexico. Yeah. And actually, to be honest, for a lot of CRM, it's actually moving company. Like to move up, you sort of have to move out.
Totally. I've done that. Yeah. Something they don't tell you, that's one thing that I wish I knew more, is just the simple, how do the upper echelons of CRM work, and what am I supposed to shoot for? Okay, I'm sitting here trying to dig this square hole in the desert. Wait, how do I move up? What are my possibilities? And to me, that was always a little foggy.
Yeah, I think that's part of the reason I bring up that topic is, we've discussed this before on the CRM podcast, maybe a bit before your time, Andrew, but I was part of a course at UNM that then became a book, and we'll put it in the show notes. And it was Joe Watkins and Carol Ellick. Part of their book is you have to have like a 5-year plan and like long-term goals. And part of that, the reason that they do that is, it doesn't need to be 5 years, guys. You could do 7, you could do 10, 6 months, whatever. But the idea is, if you have a goal, you have a place you're going for, and you can attempt to sort of map it out. I think that's sort of one of the things that a lot of people don't have in our profession, is sort of similar to like you, Andrew, where you had this vague goal of like up. You want to go up, but you don't quite know how to get there. And I think, at least with a goal, it gives people something to latch onto, to research or to ask questions or to like go get advice about. So like if you probably need it a bit more specific, as in, Andrew, what were you, a crew chief or tech or? Yeah,
I was a tech for the most part, but then I kind of got up into the crew chief world. And then from there, it was so weird because I was like, do I just have to knock the boss off in their sleep and then I become a boss? Like, how does this go? Where do I go from here? And that's where what you brought up earlier, I have to change companies, to move forward.
Yeah. I mean, probably not for everyone. I think there are some companies where you can essentially wait long enough and then get promoted up.
Yeah.
It also depends, like especially for like, say, maybe you're working like a big engineering firm or, environmental firm where they'll have like very clear paths about like promotion and, a solid HR department that has like a whole list exactly. And you get KPIs and work appraisals, and once a year or every 6 months or every 3 months, you get a score that tells you whatever, I don't know, 2 B pluses or something. And then you kind of have a route, but for a lot of people, I think, you pretty much have to constantly be looking around to hop to a different job to go up.
In my experience, the more I think about it, not only in CRM, but also in the academic world too, funnily enough, it's like you have to change the job. You can do the waiting game, but the waiting game is so long. And if the waiting game is too long, they're really trying to tell you something, So actually with that, we'll pick that up on the flip side in segment 2. We'll see you guys there.
Chris Webster here. I have a pretty full calendar, and managing that calendar can be pretty challenging. I've got things to do every day and things I need to do once a week. Of course, people book on my calendar all the time, and I have to manage that as well. I used to move my recurring events around when something would disrupt them, but now I don't have to. This is where Motion comes in. It's an intelligent AI that manages your day for you. Put events that don't involve other people in as tasks, and Motion will move them around and break them up in ways that you dictate so you get everything done. If you'd like to take back your time and your day, then head over to ArchPodNet.com/motion and check it out. That's ArchPodNet.com/motion to get at least 25% more efficient with your time. We've got regular live events coming up that we don't want you to miss. Head over to our new parent website, Culturo, and check out the live events calendar. We're ramping it up slowly, so bookmark and check back often. That's culturomedia.com with a K. Once again, that's culturomedia.com.
Hello and welcome back to the CRM Archaeological Podcast, episode 242. And it's just me, Andrew Kinkella, talking with Doug. And Doug, I'd like to throw it back to you for segment 2. What do you got?
Yeah, well, sorry, Andrew. I'm just going to toss it right back to you.
That's fine. Oh, I'm prepared.
You're prepared. You're ready. Yeah, it was because you'd mentioned you had got CRM, and now that your life goal is to basically retire from the university and be an emeritus professor who occasionally teaches and then talks about the good old days of
totally. I want to be a raconteur. That's what I want to be.
Are you going to develop some weird things like, wear a pith helmet around the campus and, maybe like leopard skin boots or, just be that weird old professor?
Dude, I've already looked into buying a monocle. I'm not kidding. So, yes is the answer.
We'll come on to preparing for your career goals, because obviously buying a monocle is something you should prepare for.
That's number 1 on the list. Buy monocle. Yeah. So in terms of how my goals kind of shifted and changed. So I think so many of us experience this in archaeology. So you get a bachelor's, and while you're getting your bachelor's, maybe you go to a field school or two and you're like, ooh, this is great, this archaeology thing. And then you get out and you realize that to continue working internationally on some, project like that, basically you need a PhD and you need connections, and you need a full-time gig. So what can you do between that? Well, there's CRM, especially if you have the skill set, which I did. I was very fortunate to go to a place where I learned the good skills for that. And so actually there was a time there where being a college professor was just like a way far away pipe dream. And I'm like, oh, that could be cool if it happens. But I think part of me, I'm very realistic in some ways. So I'm like, but dude, in realistic terms, I need a job now. I would like to stay in archaeology, and that equals CRM. So I wanted to do it right, and I got into CRM. And like you, I enjoyed it. My early experiences were a lot of survey, like yours, survey in various places in Southern California, a lot on military bases, because there's huge military bases here in Southern California. So you do these big surveys at like Camp Pendleton. And then I also had some experience on the California-Arizona border for a while, doing survey again there. Some of the things that you were talking about your experiences at the border, it felt similar. Like it almost feels the same on my skin, when I think back to when I was working on the California-Arizona border, because it was very deserty and hot and that kind of thing. But I really enjoyed it, and I wanted to take CRM. I wanted to be professional about it. And so I'm like, okay, I'm doing this. The months are rolling by, the years are rolling by, and I'm like, how do I move forward? So I started to get goals in CRM of how to move forward in there, and try to tease out an end goal for myself in CRM too. Like if the academic thing never works out, where do I go in CRM? And it was a bit of an odd road where I think for myself, if I'd stayed in CRM, my end goal would have been to own my own small company.
That's ambitious, man.
It just seemed to make sense. There's a moment, and I'm bummed that Chris isn't here today because I feel like Chris probably had the same thing. It's like after you work in it for a while, you kind of see how the sausage is made. You're like, wait. By that point, I'm like, I have a master's degree. I could bid for jobs. Why am I only making a portion of the profit? You know what I mean?
Well, Andrew, did you ever actually go to start your own company?
No.
Yeah, because then you kind of realize that not only are you not making a portion of the profit, like you're reinvesting your profit / your salary into the company to keep it going, and it's rough. But yeah, so how'd you? So you were thinking either become a company owner, or then did you end up trying to get like a PhD in there or something? How'd you end up going the community college route?
Yeah. So basically, I'm doing CRM and my CRM background, when I think about it, is sort of odd, but it's probably similar to so many others. But the very first job in CRM I got was probably somewhere in 1995. And the very last job I had in CRM was 2004. So it was almost the better part of a decade. But in that decade, I only really worked full time, 40 hours a week, and with overtime and all that for about a solid 2 years. Before that, it was kind of one job here, one job there. And then my last couple of years in CRM, where I would go to school, I was getting my PhD, right? And I'd go like to school Monday, Wednesdays, Fridays, and I do CRM Tuesdays, Thursdays. So I always had this intertwined CRM academic thing going on, which was cool. Although if you do that, you find that the academic world is always down on you for that. They almost try and make you not do that. They're like, oh, you're supposed to be a PhD person, full time. You can't have any other job, which is ludicrous.
Oh man, I got stories about that, but continue.
Of course. And I actually just that, like I had to do that totally undercover because the university not only looked down on it, but I think if they really wanted to, I think they could have like pulled my funding or something, the pittance they give you like month by month if you're a TA, not nearly enough to live on. But of course it didn't happen. And so many others do this, but it's sad that you have to almost commit a crime by working, in order to make enough money to survive. But I really enjoyed the juxtaposition of going into some really like high end theory based class on a Monday, where they're just talking these highest ideals, whatever. And then on Tuesday, I'm like watching huge machinery dig huge holes in downtown Los Angeles. And it's a learning experience. I recommend that for anyone to have those extremes. And
so then you've moved over. You're on the quote unquote academic side of things.
Yeah.
And you have your long-term goal, which is, be the weird old professor.
Yes.
The eccentric one. How are you planning? Because, people have goals and then you sort of reach your goal or you have it within reach. So you know what your end is, but how do you make plans to maintain that? Especially with academia where programs are being shut down around lots of different countries. Funding comes in waves. And I mean, with community colleges, you're much more dependent on student numbers than, say, a research intense university. And so generational, there's waves like, there's the baby boomers and went down the 80s and then shot back up in the 90s into the 2000s and then went back down. So you have a lot of sort of things that are going to kind of interfere with your long-term goal there. How are you planning to to maintain it.
Yeah. Why you got to bring me down, Doug? Why you got to bring me down to reality? That is very true. So in the community college world, as you said, it's totally about students and numbers. And we watch those trends all the time. Like how many high schoolers are in the local high schools, that kind of stuff. And so you have to be smart and watch that. But in terms of maintaining and changing goals, really, I find that it's so smart to have, I would call them side hustles that feed into your overall goals. Learning new things that are thematically correct to your goals. And even for me, like I find that I try and keep my CRM knowledge sharp, because just in case, right? That's right. If they gave me the note tomorrow and they're like, hey, Kinkella, guess what? Well, we're closing the department. I'd be like, oh my God, time to call all the CRM people I know, so I will say, funnily enough, I miss CRM a little bit. I miss the organization of it and how it's done. I miss being a part of that in some ways, because it's very different from academia. And I think what's odd for me is, so I was doing this like CRM stuff for years. And then in 2004, that summer, I'm working full time since it was summer. So I'm working, 40 hours a week on a CRM gig. I was surveying in Southern California. And basically there was a Friday where I was surveying and doing CRM. And then I put my hard hat and my orange vest in a box, and I was a college professor on the Monday. And it was a strange, absolute 180 of what I'd been doing. And I still have the box in my office. And sometimes I look at it and I'm like, oh my God, there's my hard hat. And I don't know if I've reckoned with my CRM past 100%. But so in terms of those goals and moving on, currently, since I've even achieved some of my goals, and I've been very fortunate to do some of that stuff as being an archaeology professor, I'm also like, ooh, let's get in touch with some of the CRM firms and just see what's going on. I wonder if there's anything that I could do once a week, and to kind of keep that skill set shiny. Fairly recently, and by fairly recently, I mean the last 5, 6, 7 years, I got my scuba diving certification, not just my certification, but my dive master certification. And that was something that I could use for my research in Belize, but that was like a smaller goal. And that was really fulfilling when I did it. So that worked. And I know that other people do things in their career, like they'll get a GIS certification or something that they didn't have before. And that stuff is gold, because it helps you in your job. And it also just gives you something to shoot for. It kind of, any job can have a little monotony to it, and it wipes away the monotony and kind of keeps you fresh. I don't know. Do you do any of that same sort of stuff?
Yeah. So, actually, I had to do it because I have a small child and was quite busy during the week. So I just actually submitted a bit of work for a course I took. So it was about data visualization. Mm. And so actually it was a really interesting course about using R and R Markdown. It was a different way of doing some of the work I've already done, but basically it's data visualization. And one of the 400 different strands of things I do is pulling together a lot of data, mainly on archaeologists, but it was about how to present the stuff. And I like that sort of thing, and it was good. But yeah, it's sort of that, what people love to call CPD, which I don't know, for some reason, when you say CPD, it seems like it destroys all the fun of learning.
Yeah.
I don't know why people it's one of those weird things. I think a lot of people get into archaeology, for a variety of reasons, but a lot of people are there for learning new things, discovering new things. Mm-hmm. And weirdly, it can somewhat get you start out, and this isn't everyone, but you start out at university and that's all you do is just learn. And you keep going and work, but for some reason, the fun of learning can sometimes get just taken out, surgically removed. So I do a lot along the similar lines. Is I actually like learning new things. and picking up things that, can be relevant to my work, but also, sometimes it's just random stuff that you probably is not going to be helpful for your work, but you never know. You never know. It can come back a couple of years later and suddenly that's how you get a job because you had a little bit of experience in this one random topic.
Yeah, so true. That's happened to me a bunch of times. It's where I just happen to have some funky arcane knowledge. It actually, in the CRM world, I happened to work on a historic site, just with historic bottles and stuff. It was from around 1900 or so. And I got pretty good at historic bottles, and I thought nothing of it. But then in Belize, when I was working on the Maya, we found this historic site from around 1900 that it was from loggers from 1900 working deep in the jungles of Belize. And so I wrote up this little historic site, and it became, of all the little papers and stuff I've done, it's the most popular one. Everyone downloads this historic archaeology in Belize thing I did. And the only reason I did it is because I was the only crew member who happened to know historic archaeology. And I just fell into it, so you're totally right. It's all those little, you never know, but when in doubt, there will be a time where you're going to need that skill.
Yeah, I think some of it's also sort of horizon scanning as well. What you're doing with the, just trying to keep in contact with companies, seeing if you can maybe do one day a week.
Yep.
I think, I know there are those people who talk about basically how, you could start a factory at 16 and then retire at 65. I don't see that existing anywhere anymore for pretty much any job.
Yeah.
The world's changing too much. And to be honest, we sort of talk about that as that's how things always were, but it wasn't. Even in the past, we sort of talk about oh yeah, no, this person was a potter. But you're actually, and also they might have been a part-time farmer, or at some point had been in the military, and not careers we when we talk about the past, we talk about that was, they always did that, but they didn't. Right. And it's relatively honestly really just people who were born who could go to work in the 1945 onwards, and in some other countries 1955 after they repaired all the bomb damage. Yeah, it's a quite small number of people. I think you do have to basically, if you have sort of an end goal, you can't sort of just rest on your laurels. I know there's a lot of people who are oh yeah, once you get an academic job, it's for life, but it really isn't.
No, we've heard on this podcast before when Bill and I will joke about that. It's really not that idea of just and now I have tenure, so I sit down, and it's always dynamic. You're always worried that the department's going to close, or the classes aren't going to make, or whatever. That it's constant. So it's nice being a college professor, and there is some job security. Definitely. I'm not here to say that it's the same as being a CRM tech. It's not the same, but it is not the cliche. And with that, we will end this segment 2 and come back talking more about end goals in archaeology. See you in a minute.
Want to keep this conversation going? Want to talk to the host of this show and other fans? Then join our membership program and get exclusive access to the hosts, other fans, and early access to these episodes and bonus segments and content. You'll also get forever access to our live show back catalog and any other shows ad-free. Head over to archpodnet.com/members for details. That's archpodnet.com/members.
Hello, and welcome back to the CRM Archaeological Podcast, episode 242, segment 3. And we were talking about end goals in archaeology. And I'd like to throw this over to Doug and ask, Doug, for yourself, how do you come up with steps towards getting to your end goal in the first place?
Yeah, I have to say I was quite fortunate. I've mentioned this several episodes. I took that class that became Avenues to Professionalism, the book. or it was a class, and then it was Carol and Joe's book. And one thing they had us do was actually like write down your goals. Mm-hmm. It sounds super simple, but like literally the first step is actually writing down your goals, because then they become concrete, and it's no longer something mentally that you can sort of ignore. Because if you always have sort of something in the back of your mind, it's only there when you're thinking about it. But if you write it down and you say where you want to be, and you basically mark it out, milestone it, as it were, and so you're looking at like, I want to be here in 2 years. I want to be there in 5, and then in 15, I want to be, I don't know, enjoying the sweet Andrew Kinkella life of just, wearing a monocle and
pontificating.
Yes,
pontificating, much pontificating.
Yeah. And then, realize it's fluid. And if you don't reach those goals at that time, it's okay. It's meant to set you on a path. Because if you're looking at, I want to be at a certain level in 2 years, well, that's a very concrete goal. And you actually need to add like times to your goals.
Yeah.
Like you can't just have a vague goal, because then you just push it off till forever.
Mm-hmm.
It's always there, but you don't actually set steps. But if you set like a 6-month goal or a 2-year goal, that comes quickly. I mean, well, that's, of course, it's 2 years through a pandemic, and then that can just feel like 2 decades. But you got to set times. And then once you have that, which is, a goal, and it needs to be, there's all sorts of acronyms, which is like things like SMART, which is specific, manageable, attainable, something. You can Google on the internet, and there'll be a bajillion business terms and various different ways about what your goal should be. But in the end, the goal should be somewhat measurable.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have to be like hard measurable of like, I need my salary at like 50,000 or 100,000 or something like that. It can actually be like, I want to be happy 90% of the time. Like you don't have to, like, your goals do not have to be just about like career progression in terms of like money and position or power. It could actually just be like being content.
Right.
And that's, but you want to have something that you can be able to know when you're there. And like, so like content sounds like, it can be a really vague goal, but actually, being content and happy, you can set a pretty solid goal of like, 98% of the time, I want to go into work and not hate my life. And that's a very attainable goal.
Yeah.
And so you'll know when you're there. You'll definitely know when if you're going into work and like every day, 7 out of 8 hours, you're just miserable, then you haven't reached your goal.
Right.
But
I think what you just talked about there in those last few minutes is just gold. It's like, everyone in the world, listen to what Doug just said. I find that too many people don't do this. And I just so much agree with you about writing down the steps, just either however is more comfortable for you, either if it's on a piece of paper or if it's on a file in your computer. For me, like what you just outlined, Doug, is exactly what I do. I have a sheet, like I have a document in my computer called Success Notes. And I know it sounds totally cliche and cheesy and whatever, but you guys just lean into the cheese, and do it. And I do basically what Doug just talked about for myself. I have themes. I'll have like writing success, because I'm like, I'll put stuff down on there like, a textbook, which I actually wrote. And it feels so good when you can check something off your list. You're like, yes. And I have these other things that I want to write. I have teaching success for what I'm going to do in the class and things I'd like to do, things like classes I'd like to make that I haven't done yet. I put those on there. I have Belize success for my Maya stuff when I work in Belize, like long-term goals. Ooh, it'd be great to work on this at some point. Like Doug, like you were saying, I also have other things on there that have nothing to do with job, like family success, things I'd like to do with the family. And it goes back to what you were saying about being content. And it brings me a whole lot of content when I go forward on these steps. And it's not a super pressure situation. I give myself reasonable steps. I'm like, it'd be really great if by the end of the summer I could do this, or whatever. And so having that written down chart, it's basically like a flow chart of life, has really helped me. And I look at that thing all the time. So for me, that's really helped. And what's funny, as we talked about earlier about CRM, I'm just kind of blowing the dust off my CRM success notes, hey, maybe one time a week, we'll see. Right. So it's a fun time to be creative too about your goals.
Yeah, I think when you're looking at your goals, one is you don't need to achieve them all at once.
Yeah.
And you need to break them down into smaller tasks.
Absolutely.
Like, you're gonna, like, if you have a goal of like, Andrew, if you don't mind if we use your example of like, you just, you didn't quite, it was vague how to make it to the next level. Like you just didn't know, in CRM, you didn't know how to make it like project manager, PI level and jump like that. And that is a big jump. Like if your goal is that, it can be super overwhelming because there's a ton of things you have to do and various things you have to look at, and it can be really overwhelming. Mm-hmm. And so the best thing to do is break it down to the tiniest of tasks. And I kind of look at this as like, if you don't have a coding background, this makes no sense. But basically, like, there's a thing called functional programming, which is basically when you're coding, you create functions, and each function should just have one purpose. It should do just one thing, and that's it. And that's what you should do with your steps. Like, you shouldn't like plan out like 10 steps. You should just do one very simple step. And if that step is as simple as like learning how to do, like, if you're starting out in archaeology and you want to become you have to get an entry-level job in tech, learning how to make a line level. Like just making a straight, that is seriously like, two nails, a string, a level, like, but that is a task, and that is doable. And that's something you should do. Is like, you should break it down, and you're like, okay, first you learn how to do that, then you learn how to measure on to the different stratum on your trench, and then the next thing is you learn how to draw that in. But that's a task. It should be very simple, very tiny steps that you take each time, because if not, you're going to get overwhelmed with like, oh, I need to learn GIS. Well, you're not.
Oh, dude. But yeah, I love that idea of just even the line level. And then once you do it and get good at it, you can take pride in it. And it sounds funny, but it's true. You'd be like, hey, dude, look at that line level. That was a sweet line level. And others who know archaeology are like, yeah, nicely done. You can take pride in these steps, and they feel so good when you get good at them.
And you're not going to be overwhelmed because, like, if you set a goal of like learning GIS, that's a career. Like, but like your first goal should be like, learn what GIS means,
right?
And like that's just it. And like you break it down into a bunch of smaller goals. And I think that's one of the steps. And then also, like, you probably actually end up having to do like a lot of research. Like, if you have a goal of like, actually, you know what, I want to have self-fulfillment of a spiritual level in my work, and you're like, I have no idea how to do that. Yeah, I don't know, 10,000 people write a blog each day, or a podcast, or like, there's tons of resources out there, right, on anything you want to do. I mean, it could be as much as like, actually, I want to be a business owner. I need to learn like basics of accounting, and what's accrual accounting, and like, what's cash-based accounting, and like, there are tons of mini courses, YouTube videos, podcasts,
absolutely,
blogs, books, man, any medium you can think of, I'm sure someone's done an interpretive dance on like how to do accounting. Like there's something out there on the way that you learn. So if you learn better on reading or practicing or listening to a podcast or whatever, there's going to be a ton of stuff out there. Or even just asking people, like, so there's going to be less information out there on CRM. I mean, you have stuff like Chris's book for how to get into CRM and survive it.
Yeah.
I'd say like Bill's blog is pretty good on like some of the other things, and there'll be less things, but you can also like ask coworkers, like, how did you become a PI? And also you're going to have to ask a lot of people, because some people's answers are going to be like, well, it was the 70s. There was nothing else to do. I just got out of university. I had a PhD. I had a pickup truck and a shovel. And that's how I became owner of the company. Like,
oh my God. I know, so true. And that you bring up that great point too, of asking others and multiple people. Cause you're right. You'll get the one where it's like, I was just standing there and then a bolt of lightning hit me. And you're like, yeah, well, I'm not going to have a bolt of lightning. But yeah, ask multiple people and take it seriously and write that down. I would take notes after asking people about the stuff, and I would also specifically try and find people who were, speaking of reasonable goals, who were just a little ahead of me, not super ahead of me, not a decade ahead of me that I can't even reach. Someone who's at that next step. Ooh, how'd you get to that next step? And then that's, you can get that, you can see it, you can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. And I'd also say, look for people who struggled as well. Because a lot of people, honestly, bolt of lightning, right time, right place. But when that happens, they don't actually realize it. Like you want that person who took 5 years to get to their goal, because they struggled, probably made a bunch of mistakes you'll learn from. Yeah. Like they can tell you, like, actually, I did a bunch of these things and it did not work out. Yeah. Don't do it. Whereas like the person who's just like, oh, it just fell into my lap. Well, they did one thing and it worked out for them, and they have usually no idea how to do it now. And you're totally right, Andrew. Ask someone just a little bit ahead of you, because someone moving into a different part of their career or having a goal that happened in the 1980s is very different than someone in the 2020s. Right.
So, yeah, so different. Oh, I'd also like to add, as we're talking about end goals on all this stuff, it's okay to drop a goal. If you kind of go into it for a while, you're into it, but then you just realize you're like, this isn't working out. It isn't what I thought. It's not going to get me where I want. It's a lot of work and it's really feeling like work. It's okay to let it go. You're not a loser if you see it and you go, oh, this isn't going to work. Just let it go. It's okay. I've done that several times in my career. I can think of in the diving world, right? I got really into scuba diving because it goes with some of the stuff I do in Belize, and I got my dive master certification, and that was huge for me, and that's a big deal. But then I thought I wanted to go even further, and I started to do this thing called GUE, Global Underwater Explorers. And it really was, I felt it where I was like, you know what, this is too much. This is for somebody who's a full-time diver and diving is their life. I'm a college professor. I can't do this. So I stopped at that point, and it was a good choice, right? It wasn't, it would have been foolish for me to force myself to like continue at that point.
I think that brings up something else you raised, Andrew, which is like having goals that are not all just career in archaeology. I think that's super important. And I think also, like, for anyone listening, like, archaeology may be what was it? Global
Underwater Explorers.
Yeah, so if archaeology is your global underwater explorers, it's okay to leave it. Like,
yes.
We do have this thing about like failure. Like if you leave archaeology, somehow you couldn't hack it. But honestly, like, your goals shouldn't just be career goals, but like we're talking life goals and like end goals. Like when Andrew wants to like retire with a monocle, that's a life goal right there. That doesn't have to be with archaeology.
No.
But that is that thing is like, goals will change. You mentioned family goals, which I think are super important. And, it's prioritizing and figuring out some of your goals may be to help other goals. So like if your goal is to spend more time with your family, maybe your goal is then to change your job, or not your goal. One of your steps to do that is to change your job to maybe one where you're not out in the field. You're not doing 10 days on, 4 days off in some remote location on a border between various states or countries, as we've done, or, that could be a goal. And so, yeah, like making it up to PI may not actually be a goal so much as a step to getting to what your actual goal is.
Yep.
I think that's important to think of is these goals is not just of archaeology is not the end all be all. You shouldn't be looking at this as a prism of judging success.
No.
It's not.
No, and so many people do that. They do that. You see that all the time with like PhD dissertations and stuff. They're like, oh, this is the end all be all. It's like, no, it's a step. And to a sort of a greater enlightenment, I guess, later. And with that, we are at the end of our time. So this one's been really fun. Just the two of us, just sort of sitting here hanging and talking about goals in archaeology and kind of how to get to them. We will see everybody next time. And with that, we are out of here.
Goodbye, everyone.
See you guys next time.
That's it for another episode of the CRM Archaeology Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archpodnet.com/CRMArchPodcast. Please comment and share anywhere you see the show. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website, or just email chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Support the show and the network at ArchPodNet.com/members. Get some swag and extra content while you're there. Send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. Thanks to everyone for joining me this week. Thanks also to the listeners for tuning in, and we'll see you in the field. Goodbye. This episode was produced by Chris Webster from his RV traveling the United States, Tristan Boyle in Scotland, DigTech LLC, Cultural Media, and the Archaeology Podcast Network, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
All right, is that it?
Well, you gotta stop the recording.
Oh, no, should I stop the recording?
I think you should stop the recording.
I think I could stop the recording.
Thanks for listening. Please consider joining our growing core of members over at archpodnet.com/members. If you liked what you heard, consider leaving a review wherever you're listening to this.